In the 5th year of the Xianqing reign of Emperor Gaozong of Tang, 660 AD, Su Dingfang, the commander-in-chief of the Tang Shenqiu Road march, led his army to cross the sea and destroy Baekje, capturing Baekje's king Yici. He established the Xiongjin Commandery of the Tang Dynasty in the homeland of Baekje, forming a pincer attack on Goguryeo from the north to the south. Starting from the 7th year of the Daye reign, 605 AD, when Emperor Yang of Sui sent troops to conquer Liao, the intermittent and long battle of over half a century finally saw the dawn of victory. However, just as Su Dingfang captured the royal family of Baekje in Chang'an, the flames of war erupted in Baekje. The royal family, along with the monk Daochen, welcomed the hostage Prince Fuyu Fengzhang back from the Japanese kingdom and launched a restoration movement. The Japanese also took the opportunity to invade the peninsula in an attempt to restore the former territory of the Rena Four Commanderies. The famous general Wang Wendu, who took over as the commander of Xiongjin, fell ill and died shortly after disembarking, while his ally Silla had an ambiguous attitude. Tang's rule in Baekje was in jeopardy. At this critical juncture, the traveler Wang Wenzhua, who came from 1,000 years later, turned the tide and achieved the long-standing wish of several generations of rulers of the Sui and Tang dynasties. He avenged the fathers and brothers of hundreds of thousands of Central Plains sons and turned the land of Haidong into the territory of the Tang dynasty. All of this was just the beginning, and the world embarked on a different path. Keywords of the novel.霓裳铁衣曲 no pop-ups,霓裳铁衣曲 TXT complete collection download,霓裳铁衣曲latest chapter reading. Chapter 115. Returning from the Army. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 115. Returning from the army in October of the 5th year of Tang Shenqiu, 660 AD, the capital city of Baekje was Sibi, now Fuyu County, Chungcheongnam-do, South Korea. 15 soldiers will join the army, and they will return at 80. Dao Feng, a villager, said, "Who is there at home? From afar, it appears to be your family, with numerous pine and cypress mounds." The rabbit enters from the dog's sinus, while the pheasant flies from the beam. In the courtyard, there is a valley, and in the well, there is a sunflower. Chonggu is used for making rice, and kue is used for making soup. The soup and rice are cooked for a while, and I don't know who will be affected. Looking east when I went out, tears streamed down my clothes. The evening was setting in the west, with scattered snowflakes falling from the sky. Wang Wenzhua could feel the snowflakes falling on his face, melting as if in tears. The sound of the Chang flute coming from outside the city, with a mournful melody, and the low voice of harmony coming from the military camp below the city, singing precisely this song, 15 conscriptions in the army. The words were originally about the desolate scene of an old soldier returning home, but his family was in ruins, leaving him alone. It was like the mood of the Tang army soldiers at this moment, with the sound of the Chang flute causing the brave soldiers to cry, not the sound of the flute, but just the mood of the people at this moment. Although the Yellow Sea is wide, it can eventually be crossed, but what lies before me is 1,000 years of time. Even if there are 100 Zhang ships, they cannot be crossed. Perhaps you still have a day to return to your hometown, but I'm afraid I will never see the faces of my family and friends again in this life. Wang Wenzhua sighed, brushed off the snow on his face, and traveled to this world for over 3 years. From being panicked at the beginning, to becoming a slave to others, he was finally forced to join the army by Li Daitao. In just 3 years, he had experienced more than the past 20 years combined. The appearance of his family and friends in his memory was also somewhat blurred, and sometimes he also asked himself, is everything in front of him just a dream or a reality? At least you gave me a suit of armored weapons, livestock, and horses, which is not a bad treatment. Wang Wenzhua's face showed a bitter smile. At that time, it was the early Tang Dynasty, and the system of government soldiers was still in effect. Those who joined the army had to bring their own military uniforms, oxen, donkeys, and embarrassing provisions. If there was a lack of armored livestock, their status in the army could only be as servants, and their status was low, and vice versa. The family that forced Wang Wenzhua's son to join the army was not stingy in this regard. They took out the entire set of household items that were originally prepared for their son. With a good physique and a complete set of pack animal armor and household items fed by a nutritious diet in modern society, Wang Wenzhua became a fire leader, a small leader in the Tang Dynasty army, as soon as he joined the army, and there were also about 10 people under his command. I just don't know when this will end up. Wang Wenzhua looked into the distance. Not far from the city wall was the market, and a little further away was the residential area. Rows of respectable courtyards, but most of them were empty, with less than 1/3 still inhabited. This was the result of the war. 2 months ago, Su Dingfang, the commander-in-chief of the Tang Shenqiu Road March, led a 100,000-strong army to cross the sea, winning consecutive battles and facing the capital city of Baekje. King Fuyu Yici of Baekje had to surrender and bind himself. When the city was destroyed, many Baekje nobles were killed, and the rest were also abducted back to the Tang Dynasty by Su Dingfang. The fish that escaped the net fled back to their own territories, hiding in the sturdy mountain city, watching these foreign invaders coldly, waiting for the situation to change. Sanlang of the Wang family. A familiar shout came from under the city wall. Wang Wenzhua poked his head out, but it was He Beong, his military officer, who said, "Lu Tuan too is going hunting in Luweze tonight. Are you also going, Sanlang?" "Of course I have to go." Wang Wenzhua smiled and said, "But I still need to take a walk around the city. Maybe you'll have to wait for me for a while. Hurry up, don't delay. We're waiting for you under the big locust tree outside the west gate." Wang Wenzhua turned around the city wall twice and then came down from the city. Returning to his residence, he saw a man with braided hair sitting cross-legged on the ground, pounding beans. This was his only gain so far in Baekje. A Mahan nomadic slave, Baekje was a slave country at the time, with the upper class consisting of the southern Fuyu people and the lower class consisting of the local 3 Koreans, namely Mahan, Chenhan, and Benhan, the 3 local tribes of ancient southern Korea. "Sangqiu, stop working. Prepare the horses, bring dry food, and let's go hunting at Deer Tail Lake tonight. If we're lucky, we'll have deer meat to eat tomorrow." Wang Wenzhua spoke while gesturing. After spending time together, this Mahan person can already hear some simple Chinese, and Wang Wenzhua can also hear some local dialect. With the help of gestures, the two can now communicate. Wang Wenzhua also gave him a name from Don Quixote. Sangqiu heard Wang Wenzhua say there was meat to eat, grinned happily, threw down the wooden pestle, and ran towards the stable behind the house. Perhaps due to his past experience as a pastoral slave, Sangqiu's movements were quick. In just a moment, he prepared his mount and pack horse, and Wang Wenzhua also took off his armor and changed into a lightweight short coat. He hung the bao bag hulu on the saddle and inserted a short knife to release his hand in his waist. Sangqiu piled up all the dry food and miscellaneous items on the pack horse, grabbed an iron fork, and the master and servant led the horse towards the west gate. After leaving the west gate, I saw a group of people standing or sitting under the big locust tree next to the road. They were the same comrades who had previously invited me to go hunting. From a distance, I saw Wang Wenzhua standing up one after another. The leader of the group was wearing a gauze cloth head, a tight-sleeved black military uniform, a leather belt adorned with silver nails, a long sword hanging from the waist, and a burly figure. It was Luan, the mid-level officer of the Tang army, who held the highest official position in this small group. Since Sanlang has also arrived, then everyone is here. Let's all get up and set off. Everyone responded and jumped onto the Malay horse, while Sangqiu also jumped onto the pack horse and followed closely behind. He was riding a pack horse, which was much shorter than the war horses that the others were riding. He also carried a lot of dry food and miscellaneous items, naturally falling at the back. It looked very comical and immediately caused a burst of laughter. Sanlang. Luan turned to look at Sangqiu, who was trying his best to urge his horse, and asked Wang Wenzhua, when the city was destroyed, everyone was fighting for a woman of wealth. Why did you choose this shepherd slave? Wang Wenzhua smiled and said, I don't want to have any disputes with my companions over a woman of wealth. Look at this shepherd who is injured and lying on the ground without anyone to care about. It's pitiful, so I chose him. Sanlang is indeed a bodhisattva with a kind heart. Luan smiled and said, but now it seems that you are the most deserving, and good deeds come in return. Why do you say that? A few days ago, I received a letter from my family. Lu En's face showed a hint of gloom. The letter mentioned that after the previous group of people who returned home returned, not only did the matter of being a high-ranking official go to waste, but also a lot of the hard-earned wealth was extorted. When I returned, I was afraid that my wealth would also be forcibly taken away by others. However, your shepherd slave was not insignificant and should still be able to be saved, so it was not a waste of time. I see, no wonder I just heard some resentment and injustice in the sound of the flute on the city wall. Yes. Luan sighed and said, we have come from afar to conquer the enemy, and all we seek is for the emperor to defeat the enemy and make contributions, so that we can return to our hometown and honor the ancestors of Emperor Gaozong. We never expected to end up in such a land. How can we not be discouraged by this? End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Complaints. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Complaints. Wang Wenzhua looked left and right, and saw that everyone accompanying him had a look of anger on their faces. It turned out that during the reign of Emperor Taizong Zhengguan and Emperor Gaozong Yonghui, although the military law was strict, the court treated meritorious soldiers very well. Not only were they given gold and silk, but also the fallen soldiers were sent envoys by the emperor to their hometowns to comfort and mourn, and their descendants could inherit the official positions and titles of their ancestors and receive preferential treatment of exemption from labor taxes. So every time we go on an expedition, many people bring their own weapons and food as volunteers to join the army. However, since the reign of Emperor Xianqing, the soldiers who went on expeditions have rarely received favors from the imperial court, and there have been few compensations for those who died in battle. The Tang army conquered Baekje, conquered the enemy capital, and even the soldiers who made great contributions to the country did not receive official titles upon returning home. Their families were often conscripted for labor. Having noble titles in their homes could reduce labor taxes, which was also the main motivation for those who volunteered to join the army at that time. Even some Tang soldiers who were convicted by the military officials of the Ministry of War for minor offenses and took away their already obtained honors and titles, as well as the spoils of war they fought hard in foreign countries. Naturally, these Tang soldiers who stayed in Baekje felt cold-hearted and increasingly resentful. Brother Lu, according to me, being in Baekje is not entirely without benefits. Wang Wenzhua smiled, and everyone looked unhappy, except for him with a smile on his face. What are the benefits of this remote land in Haidong, where even dogs are not needed? Heba Yong responded indignantly, if the military order comes in the morning, I will board the ship in the afternoon. If I stay overnight, I will become a wild dog on the roadside. Hee hee. Wang Wenzhua laughed and said, you're going too far. It's said that this deer-tail pond is the royal garden of King Baekje. In the past, if it weren't for the royal family touching it, they would have chopped off their heads. If it weren't for us coming to Baekje, how could we have had such an opportunity to hunt here? What kind of Baekje king, just a barbarian chieftain, he's just like a monkey bathing in a crown. You can't say that. Wang Wenzhua smiled and said, although Baekje cannot be compared to the Tang Dynasty, there are 50,000 households in this city alone. According to the calculation of one household producing one person, there is an army of 50,000 people, and Sibi City is just one of the 5 capitals of Baekje. Including other prefectures and counties, the household registration is at least 300,000, and the number of people in Xinjia is not less than 300,000. In the Tang Dynasty, this is at least a governor of a major prefecture, right? How much blood do we need to shed to achieve great success in order to become the governor of a state? After listening to Wang Wenzua's analysis, everyone burst into laughter and the atmosphere became lively. Luan smiled and said, after hearing what Sanlang said, would you be willing to stay and become the king of Baekje? Why not? Wang Wenzhua laughed and said, as the saying goes, it's better to be the head of a chicken than the queen of a cow. Although this place is a bit remote, the land is fertile and the city is dangerous and solid. If you were to be king here, wouldn't it be much better than returning to your hometown and being governed by people? That's true, a man with a white face next to him laughed and said, let's talk about the King of Mercy. He was beaten by General Su and surrendered with his armor and face tied. But the court still moved him back to Chang'an and bestowed him with high officials and noble titles to avoid any wrongdoing. He eats and drinks well. It's really frustrating to see him suffer from those petty officials' difficulties after we fight hard here and make great contributions. Yes, the court is really thick on the 4 barbarians and thin on the Xia people. It's very harsh. Yes, take a look at the palaces of that barbarian chieftain. Although they cannot be compared to Chang'an Taiji Palace, they must be much stronger than the governor's office. Shut up. Luan stopped his colleague's complaint and turned his gaze to Wang Wenzhua. Sanlang, what do you think of the current situation? Wang Wenzhua hesitated for a moment, although the relationships between these people were very good on a daily basis, and they came from another place, so they could be considered part of the township party. But after all, saying too much leads to losing, and just now I felt a bit overwhelmed when I said that sentence. Luan saw Wang Wenzua's thoughts and smiled, Sanlang, I didn't just tell them to stop talking because I didn't think you were wrong, but because what they said earlier was just some angry words. Their words were pleasant but of no use, and it would actually cause trouble. But you are different. Here are all the local party robes, and in Baekje, there are people on the same boat. If you give a word, everyone will miss your love. Brother Lu's words are too heavy. Wang Wenzhua smiled and said, how can I dare to use the words little brother for guidance? It's okay, you just talk, we just listen. Lu En's face was completely devoid of a smile. You're right, we owe you a favor. If you're not right, just pretend you haven't heard anything. Luan holds the highest official position and is also the oldest among these people, and is already the leader. He asked Wang Wenzhua so solemnly, and everyone's eyes suddenly gathered. Wang Wenzhua knew he couldn't get away with it this time, so he forced a smile and said, then I'll just say a few words casually. Please forgive me for any mistakes. Luan didn't say much and made a gesture of, please. I think the current situation in Baekje is quite unfavorable. Is it because of the sound of the flute just now? Luan asked. Yes, but not entirely. Wang Wenzhua said, indeed, the morale of our army is not high at the moment, but this is not a big problem. As long as the generals and commanders give a heavy reward, the court will fulfill the promised official titles and send reinforcements, and the morale will naturally be boosted. After all, we are now in an enemy country, surrounded by enemies and separated by the sea from our home country. Even if we want to run, there is no place to run. In terms of military strategy, it is a dead end. Sun Tzu has said, put in a dead end and have a new life. Don't worry about someone refusing to fight to the death. That's right. Luan nodded and showed a satisfied smile. Obviously, he also thought of what Wang Wenzhua had said before. So what do you mean by not good? There are 2 places. Wang Wenzhua extended 2 fingers. First, there is no food, second, there is no hope. Without food, isn't that a good idea? Luan frowned and said, as far as I know, the food stored in this city is enough for the entire army to use for half a year. Can the army still go out of the city and recruit on the spot? Besides, Silla is my ally. If it's not possible, Silla can also bring food here. Brother Lu, when the Grand Marshal and Silla led a large army to attack Baekje, although they defeated their country, took over their chieftain, and brought them back to the Tang Dynasty. The 100-foot beetle died without stiffening. Their country had been established for hundreds of years, had many children, and had a deep relationship with their subordinates. When our army broke down the city, many people were killed, but their trust was not fulfilled. Moreover, there were many mountain cities in their country, with the large ones over 1,000 households and the small ones over 100 households, scattered all over the world. Their chieftain mostly guarded the city, but now they are just pretending to be obedient. Once the situation changes, wouldn't there be no one or two heroes rising up to restore the country? At present, the autumn grain has been harvested and stored until next summer's harvest, and the fields are without grain. Where will I get the grain from then on? The grain for the first half of the year seems quite abundant, but this is calculated based on the garrison of over 10,000 people in the city. If we go out to war, it will be far from enough. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Night Harvest. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Night Harvest. Although what you said is good, isn't there still allied Silla? As I see below, the allies cannot support it. If the situation changes, Silla may not necessarily come to provide food. Why do we say that Baekje had no conflict with our Tang dynasty, but it was a mortal enemy of Silla? When the Lord of Silla sent his children as hostages, he repeatedly begged to send troops to our Tang dynasty to suppress Baekje. This deployment was at the invitation of Silla. If Baekje were to restore the country, how could the Silla people not transport food? The feud between Silla and Baekje is true. It was also true that Silla allied with our Tang dynasty to defeat Baekje. However, at that time, Baekje was strong while Silla was weak. If Silla did not ally with our Tang dynasty, Silla was not enough to survive on its own. And now, most of the royal nobles of Baekje have been brought to our Tang dynasty. The city walls are broken, the treasury is empty, and the people are exhausted. Even if we can repel our army and rise again, it is not enough to harm Silla. Instead, it happens to be the bait for Silla's growth. But if Silla sends troops and supplies to help our Tang dynasty defeat the remaining Baekje army, the land of Baekje will become the county of our Tang dynasty, and the people of Baekje will become the people of our Tang dynasty. Silla not only cannot expand its territory and benefit from it, but also needs to be careful which day it will follow the footsteps of Baekje. What would you do if you were the king of Silla? Upon hearing Wang Wenzhua mention this, everyone's faces became gloomy, especially Luan. He frowned and pondered for a moment before answering. If I were to sit on the mountain and watch the tiger fight, and wait for both Tang and Baekje to be defeated before sending troops, I would win 2 tigers in one fell swoop. Not bad. Wang Wenzhua smiled and said, if it were me, I would use the excuse of sending troops to support me and encroach on the land at the border to strengthen myself. At the same time, I would order people to secretly search for descendants of the Baekje royal family for the future. Today, I have heard what Sanlang said. He has read for 10 years and truly deserves to be a descendant of the Langyawang family. Luan sighed and turned to the people. Everyone, I can't reveal a single word of Sanlang's words. Do you understand? Yes. Everyone also understood the weight of the words just now, their expressions solemn, and their faces no longer relaxed as before. Luan ordered everyone and looked at Wang Wenzhua with a special gaze. Suddenly, he sighed, I thought that after the Hojing rebellion, all the big surnames in Jiangdong would be destroyed, and the Wang family in Langya would no longer have any successors. Now that I see Sanlang, I realize that although the main trunk of Huailu Demu is decaying, it can grow new branches again. Wang Wenzhua was confused by Lu An's words, and after pondering for a while, he remembered that the Wang family who sent him to Korea to join the army for his son seemed to have a wealthy family. Did it come from the Wang family in Langya? But it's impossible to ask about this kind of thing, otherwise wouldn't it reveal one's true identity? As they spoke, the group had already arrived at Deer Tail Lake. As it was already dark, they set up crossbows in the animal path among the reeds by the lake, and then returned to the high ground next to the lake to rest in a urine reed shed guarding the hunting ground, preparing to wait until dawn the next day to encircle. Due to being in an enemy country, Luan assigned a night post, and Wang Wenzhua drew lots and captured the second squad post. At around midnight, he was awakened and walked outside the reed shed. In order to prevent a fire at night, the warm fire had already been extinguished. Wang Wenzhua wrapped his cloak tightly and sat cross-legged on a pile of reeds to be processed. He placed his sword horizontally on his knee, coated it with oil, and then took out deer skin to gently wipe it. The night breeze blows, carrying the unique water smell of the swamp. Occasionally, the sound of birds and animals drinking in the lake can be heard from afar, making everything sound even more peaceful. Wang Wenzhua oiled the sword and inserted it back into its sheath. He felt a bit cold on his body and was about to get up and move around for warmth when he heard a mournful scream coming from not far away, followed by the sound of a blade of grass breaking. He quickly jumped up and drew his sword out of its sheath. What happened? With such a big commotion, the people in the thatched hut were also awakened. The first one to rush out was Luan, barefoot, holding a short spear in his hand, with a nervous expression on his face. I'm not sure. But the sound should be human. Wang Wenzhua whispered, maybe it was hit by the crossbow we set up. Luan listened attentively for a while, only hearing the faint sound of reeds, but no more screams. He sneered, if it were really a person, and you were hit by a duck-billed arrow, an ancient arrow with a flat shape resembling a duck's mouth, causing a particularly large wound when shot, commonly used during hunting, you would be a tough guy who could resist shouting. Wang Wenzhua nodded and said, but don't you think it's a bit strange for such a tough guy to come to Deer Tail Lake in the middle of the night, Brother Lu? Luan glanced at Wang Wenzhua and nodded. He turned his head and shouted to the reed shed, wake up everyone, light the torch, let's go down and take a look together. The night was pitch black, and the reeds patted their cheeks. The flames flickered in the night breeze, casting strange shadows all around. Sangqiu led the way with an iron fork, while Wang Wenzhua held a sword in one hand and a rattan card in the other, closely following behind. The master and servant walked very carefully, and no one knew what was hidden in the darkness. The roles of hunters and prey could change at any time. Moreover, they had set up more than one crossbow before, and they couldn't see the marks clearly in the darkness. If they stepped on the crossbow they had set up, wouldn't it be self-inflicted? The two of them searched deep and shallow for a while, but Sangqiu suddenly stopped and whispered, Lang Jun, look, there are footprints and blood stains. Wang Wenzhua squatted down and, with the help of the firelight, examined carefully. Sure enough, there were several footprints on the ground, and there were large black marks on the collapsed reeds. He reached out his finger and touched it close to his nose, smelling a bloody smell, which was indeed blood. Follow up, don't worry, he's injured and can't run far, be careful of the dog jumping over the wall. Wang Wenzhua whispered as he inserted his finger into his mouth and blew a whistle with force. The sharp whistle immediately pierced the night sky, and several distant flames immediately approached towards him. A few minutes later, Sangqiu found this mysterious unlucky guy behind a collapsed reed thicket. Short and thin, covered in fur, covered in mud and reeds, with a piece of rag tightly wrapped around the root of his right thigh, blood constantly oozing out. He held a dagger in his right hand and a wooden staff in his left hand, looking viciously at the men around him, like an old wolf on a dead end. Luan gave a glance, and Li Tong on his right hand slashed the man's wrist with the back of the knife. The man let out a scream and the dagger landed. Before his voice could fall, he was pinned to the ground by three people rushing towards him. No matter how hard he struggled, after a moment, he was still bound up in all sorts of ways. Li Tong found a wax ball on his body. Luan crushed the wax ball and wrapped it in a silk cloth strip that was about 2 feet long and about 2 fingers wide. When he shook it open, there were only some scattered strokes on it, like ghost symbols, and he didn't know what it was written on. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Encryption. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 4 Encryption. Cut off that long stick and see if there's anything hidden inside. Luan shouted sternly. Yes. Li Tong cut the wooden staff into 2 pieces with a knife and carefully examined it under the torch. Disappointed, he threw the staff to the ground and said, "No, nothing." Wang Wenzhua picked up the silk cloth strip and looked at it under the firelight. He then picked up the half-piece of wooden staff that had been thrown on the ground and compared it. He already had a plan in his heart, so he carefully put away the half-piece of wooden staff. "Tell me, who sent you here? What is written on this silk cloth?" Luan said sternly. But the man sat on the ground, silent, with a mocking expression in his eyes. "Brother Lu, it's not easy to pry open this guy's mouth." Wang Wenzhua whispered, "Let's leave it to the boss and let him have a headache. The most important thing for us now is to make sure we send him back alive. After suffering that sudden blow, he has shed a lot of blood." Luan also realized at this moment and immediately had someone take him to the thatched hut. He had already wrapped it up and everyone stopped hunting at dawn. He quickly returned to the city. "Sibi City. Did you find this from this guy?" Lu Renyuan, the commander of Zhou Xiaowei and the protector of Xiongjin, looked at the silk strip in his hand and asked Luan, who was looking down. "Not bad, you tell the story from beginning to end." Lu Renyuan placed the silk cloth on a table, his face solemn. As the saying goes, a prime minister comes from the east and a general comes from the west. He came from the Lu family in Jiaoyin County, now Suida, Shaanxi, and is said to have been a descendant of Lu Bao, the right-wing king of the Xiongnu during the Western Jin Dynasty. He has been a wealthy family in Suizhou for generations. His great-grandfather served in the court of Northern Wei and moved to the Guangzhou region with Emperor Xiaowu of Northern Wei. After experiencing the division between the east and west of Northern Wei, the descendants of the Lu family of Jiaoying were incorporated into the army and fought fiercely against the Turkic people, Tuyuhun people, Ruren people in the north, Northern Qi in the Kanto region, and Liang and Chen in the south. Although Lu Renyuan himself obtained an official position through the influence of his ancestors, he still maintained the simplicity of the martial arts people of Guanxi. As a high-ranking official, his entire body was devoid of literary elegance in his attire, his objects were not inlaid with gold and silver, and he had no flashy style like the noble children of Luoyang and Chang'an at that time. Yes. Luan went out of the city from the crowd to hunt in the Deer Tail Pond and stayed overnight by the edge of the swamp. He heard the sound and rode through the night to search, recounting in detail from beginning to end. Lu Renyuan listened quietly without saying anything to urge. After Luan finished speaking, he asked, "So who found this messenger at that time?" "Fire Chief Wang Wenzhua." "Call him in." "Yes." After a moment, Wang Wenzhua came in and saluted Lu Renyuan as if he were a proper person. Lu Renyuan looked up and down and smiled, "You have captured the messenger of the thief, and I will reward you with 5 pieces of silk." "Thank you very much, General." Wang Wenzhua quickly expressed his gratitude. "Send the order, first have the doctor examine this guy's injuries, then interrogate him severely, and make sure to investigate the truth of the matter." "General." The gaze inside the room immediately focused on Wang Wenzhua. Lu Renyuan frowned and asked somewhat displeased, "What's wrong? Do you have anything else to do?" "No need to execute, I can also figure out what's written on that silk cloth." Lu Renyuan became more serious. He took off the iron horn and black gauze cap from his head, placed it on the side table, and then picked up the chopping knife, placing it horizontally on his knee. He said coldly, "You tell me. Please give the silk cloth strip to me." Lu Renyuan nodded and the attendant handed the silk cloth strip to Wang Wenzhua. Wang Wenzhua asked someone to bring the half of the wooden stick, fix one end of the silk cloth on one end of the stick, and carefully wrap it tightly around the stick in circles. Then he read, "General, this silk cloth strip says, Your Highness foam will cross the sea next year, and great assistance will arrive. On November 10th, there will be a grain-burning uprising. Daochen and Guisher Fushin. The attendant took the wooden stick from Wang Wenzua's hand and presented it to Lu Renyuan. I saw the silk spiral wrapped around the wooden stick, with the words spoken by Wang Wenzua just now written from top to bottom. The person who wrote the letter originally wrapped this slender silk cloth around a wooden stick and wrote on it. However, after removing the cloth from the stick, there were only a bunch of disorderly gestures left on the cloth. Unless it was re-wrapped around a wooden stick of the same thickness, no one could understand what was written on it. What a cunning intention! Lu Renyuan snorted coldly and placed the wooden stick and silk strip aside, with a smile on his face. Wang Huichang, the thief's method is very clever. How did you come up with it? Report to General, this is not something that my subordinates came up with, but rather something recorded in a book I read when I was young. Oh. What book would record these? It is a copy of the Shurangama Sutra, in my subordinate's family, written by someone in the gaps between the lines. Wang Wenzua said according to the original fabricated answer, I don't know who wrote it specifically. Do you still have the Shurangama Sutra at home? Lu Renyuan opened his eyes curiously, no wonder he was so curious. At that time, knowledge was monopolized by many aristocratic families, and generals like him from generations of generals could easily read and write. For more formal articles and letters, they had to rely on memorials. However, Wang Wenzua, a fire leader, surprisingly had the Shurangama Sutra at home. It was like a white crane suddenly emerging from a crow. As soon as Wang Wenzua spoke, he knew it was not right, but he couldn't change it either. He nodded and said yes, while Luan interjected, General, Wang Wenzua is a descendant of the Langyue Wang family. Oh. It turns out to be a descendant of the Langyue Wang family, why didn't you say it earlier? Lu Renyuan's expression changed greatly. He took off the chopping knife on his knee and put on the iron horn black gauze fu head that was placed on a table. He smiled and said, please get up quickly. It is indeed a wicked feudal society, and the attitude towards it is completely different from that of the aristocrats. Wang Wenzua muttered while standing up. Lu Renyuan asked the guards to bring 2 hu beds, and Luan also had a seat. Lu Renyuan asked a few questions about Wang Wenzua's family situation, and Wang Wenzua then recounted the life story he had memorized, taking pictures of gourds and gourds. Our ancestors were once ordered by the imperial court to travel south to Xianqing and have a knee-to-knee conversation with Ergayazu Wang Yuanchang, the 6th-generation descendant of the Eastern Jin Prime Minister Wang Dao, a literary figure from southern Qi, and one of the 8 friends of Jingling. They thought it was too late to meet. Today, we met in a foreign country, and it can be considered destined. Gaozu. This friendship may have gone too far, right? Not to mention that I have nothing to do with the Lashizi Langyue Wang family. Even if I were really a descendant of the Langyue Wang family, who would have known that the 2 ancestors met once hundreds of years ago? But it seems that this guy's ancestors didn't do well at the time, otherwise they wouldn't have remembered this matter so clearly, Wang Wenzua thought to himself, but his face also pretended to be filled with emotions. No matter what, my identity as the Langyue Wang family is true or false, but now he is a prominent left brave guard general and protector. With a pole hanging down, can I still not climb along? End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Transfer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Transfer. My son is unworthy, he is in the midst of the army, which is a disgrace to our ancestors' reputation, making the general laugh. Wang Wenzua pretended to be ashamed and whispered. He was not afraid that these words would offend Lu Renyuan. With the former reputation of the Langyue Wang family, it was indeed a great insult to his ancestors for his children to join the army. Lu Renyuan was taken aback by the words and immediately laughed. What you said is not right. Flowers are not always good, and the moon is not always round. How can there be a family that will never prosper and never decline in the world? How could you know that the revival of the Langyue Wang family will not come from you today? Someone. Record the merits for Wang Huichang. Capture the enemy, be a messenger, break their strategy, and be rewarded with 2 rewards. Thank you for your cultivation, General. Wang Wenzhua had been in the army for over a year and was very familiar with the military achievement system of the Tang army. He quickly knelt down to thank you. According to the military law of the Tang Dynasty, anyone who has made military achievements is awarded the title of honorary officer. The highest rank of an honorary officer is called Shangzhuguo, which is a second-rank official and requires 12 transformations to achieve. The 12 transformations, in Mulan Ci, which states 12 transformations of strategy and rewards to the 100,000 strong, means that Mulan has made great contributions, and her achievements have reached their limit. The lowest rank is Martial Cavalry Captain, which is equivalent to reaching the 7th rank with just 1 turn. Zhuan is a unit used to measure achievements when awarding honors to officials. For those who are awarded military merit, on the battlefield or after the war, the secretary accompanying the army shall record the situation before the war, the process of the war, and the outcome of the victory or defeat. At the same time, the number of enemies killed or captured by each official or soldier shall be recorded and reported to the Ministry of Personnel. The officials of the Ministry of Personnel repeatedly reviewed and verified the facts, then drafted official ranks, submitted them to the emperor, and waited for the appointment of officials. According to the conditions before the war. Using fewer strikes and more is considered going to battle, the number of soldiers, including the number of soldiers and equipment, is equivalent to being in the middle of the formation, and being in the lower formation is based on more strikes and less equipment. According to the outcome of war, killing or capturing 40% of the enemy is called upper capture, killing or capturing 20% of the enemy is considered a medium capture, killing or capturing 10% of the enemy is called capture. Based on the conditions before the war and the results of the war, formulate the number of transfers. Entering the battle and winning the battle is called 5 turns, playing and winning in battle are 4 turns, upward and downward gains are 3 turns, and the following decreases and so on. Although a distinguished official has no position, no actual power, and is only promoted, whether it is for future political and military promotion, they will always refer to a distinguished official. Although Wang Wenzhua has made significant contributions, he crossed the heavenly valley from soldier to official without firing an arrow, which can be said to have taken advantage of this Langyuan family. San Lang, it's so difficult for you to keep that wooden stick hidden from me. Luan suddenly sighed as he walked out the door. Wang Wenzhua was about to explain, but Luan laughed again and said, well, if it were me, I would have kept it a secret. Congratulations. Luan was so magnanimous, and Wang Wenzhua felt a bit embarrassed. He smiled bitterly and said, this matter is indeed my fault. I hope Brother Lu can forgive me. What's so accommodating about this? Luan laughed and said, if it weren't for you, San Lang, someone else would have thought it through and couldn't come up with a way to hide this secret message. This credit should have belonged to you. Everyone is from the village, and here we are a family. It would be too presumptuous of you to say so. What Brother Lu said is right. Wang Wenzhua nodded gratefully. Otherwise, because we didn't even hit a rabbit last night, why don't we just have me as the host tonight and treat everyone to a drink? You should have invited this drink. Luan laughed and said, if you don't give a single arrow, you'll be rewarded twice. At least you'll be a martial cavalry captain. If you don't eat you hard, you'll be fine. You don't need to trouble yourself. You've been up all night, go back and rest first. I'll leave the banquet to Li Tong, and I promise you'll arrange it properly. Thank you very much, Brother Lu. Wang Wenzhua returned to his residence and lay in bed. Although he hadn't slept all night, he was extremely tired, but couldn't sleep at all. His mind was filled with the line written on the silk cloth. Your Highness phone will cross the sea next year, and great reinforcements will arrive. On November 13th, there will be a grain-burning uprising. Daochen and Guisher Fushin. His Highness Feng should be a fish in the net among the royal family of Baekje. If he crosses the sea next year, he should not be in Baekje now, but in a place across the sea from Baekje. Is that in Japan? It is also possible that it was in Goguryeo, although Silla had already taken control of the Han River basin from 3 sides surrounded Baekje. There was no land passage between Baekje and Goguryeo, but there was still a sea route connecting them. Moreover, Goguryeo was at war with the Tang Dynasty and had an alliance with Baekje. It was appropriate for the king of Baekje to keep his children as hostages in Goguryeo. The phrase, "a great aid is about to arrive," is very simple. First, an internal attack should be launched, burning down the Tang army's grain reserves, and then launching a large-scale attack, which is also a common tactic. Daoqin and Guisher Fuxin should be the leaders of the internal forces in Baekje. As long as they take the initiative and capture these 2 individuals, the internal forces will be leaderless. Even if the Prince Feng mentioned in the letter crossed the sea with a large army, it would be a guest army, making it much easier to deal with. Wang Wenzhua pondered on the bed for a long time, only to fall asleep drowsily around noon. In his dream, he stood on the edge of a steep cliff, where the land ahead had reached its end, unfolding into an infinite expanse filled with the unique blue of the sea. At the boundary between the sea and the sky, he vaguely saw countless tiny black dots. At first, he thought he was dizzy, but gradually his black spots grew larger. The mast, sail, and finally the hull rose from the sea level with the rising sun, and each ship was filled with soldiers. There were many ships, so many that he couldn't count them clearly, with sails blocking the sky and the sound of seashells. A sudden gust of cold wind blew, causing his hair to stand straight, and the sharp whistling sound made him shiver all over. At that moment, Wang Wenzhua suddenly realized what he was seeing. To the east, the enemy comes from the east. Wang Wenzhua shouted and sat up suddenly. He could still remember the scene of countless warships in his dream, and the sun rose from behind them. Shang Qiu walked in and looked at Wang Wenzhua with a caring expression on his ugly face. Wang Wenzhua touched his forehead, which was covered in cold beads of sweat, and his throat was parched with thirst. He wiped his sweat and coughed, "Pour me a glass of water." After drinking water, Wang Wenzhua finally felt better. He jumped out of bed and looked at the sky outside. It was almost dark, and he didn't know how the banquet in Luan was being prepared. Should Shangqiu go and ask? Wang Wenzhua hesitated. Lang Jun. Shangqiu whispered, "In the afternoon, Lu Tuan's head came and said to wake you up and go to the tavern at the city gate. When did you come? Why didn't you wake me up?" Wang Wenzhua said urgently. "After the completion of the Great Ming 1630, I went to other book stations to write The Silk Road Tycoon. I had planned to open a new book last year, but due to the pandemic, various things became busy and delayed. The serialization started a few days ago. Sorry. Last night when I flipped through the comments section, I found that someone had confused me with Bottle Fighter. I don't know how to get along, but at first glance, my writing style revealed that it was completely 2 people. It just happened that I had written 2 books with the same name." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Promotion Celebration. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Promotion Celebration. It's Lu Tuan too who didn't let me wake you up. Shangqiu replied with some grievances. He said as long as the sun is lower than that tree top and it arrives. Damn it. Wang Wenzhua looked outside and saw that the sun had already set halfway. He cursed softly and quickly wiped his face with some well water before taking Shangqiu all the way to the tavern. Like the majority of local residents, the tavern is a long house, half of which is located below ground level, with small windows for better warmth. Wang Wenzhua lifted the heavy curtain and entered the door. A sour smell with a stimulating alcohol smell filled his nose. He instinctively covered his nose and stopped walking. The tavern looked spacious compared to the outside, with a dozen or so large wooden barrels placed on the right side against the wall, and a stove on the other side. Several runners are running around carrying pallets. The landlady is scooping out a liquid from a wooden barrel that emits a pungent odor. This is a type of wine made from birch juice and corn, which the locals love. Long tables were filled with empty seats, mostly dressed in Tang costumes. There were warriors and merchants sitting on chairs, whispering and occasionally emitting loud laughter. Wang Wenzhua felt his sleeve tugged twice, and when he turned around, he saw Sangqiu staring pitifully at the boss's wife. More precisely, the wooden spoon in her hand that was scooping wine, with saliva flowing out of the corner of his mouth. Okay. Wang Wenzhua reluctantly took out a piece of meat, commonly known as the Sui Dynasty 5 Zhu coin, from his wallet and stuffed it into Sangqiu's hand. I can only drink 2 cups, but if I have too much, it won't work. Sangqiu nodded quickly, making an inexplicable sound as he grabbed the copper coins and ran towards the landlady. Wang Wenzhua looked around and finally found his friend's table, walking towards it. Sanlang, you've finally arrived. Luan waved his hand enthusiastically. Move aside and make room for Sanlang. This stewed rabbit meat is good, Sanlang, give it a try. Wang Wenzhua smiled at his companion who had made way for him, sat down, and Luan was right. Although this stewed rabbit meat didn't look very good, it tasted really good. The brown rabbit meat with hot soup, mixed with large pieces of turnips, radishes, and mushrooms, removed the original earthy smell of the rabbit meat. He ate a few pieces and suddenly felt hot on his body. Sanlang. A wooden cup was reached out next to him, and Wang Wenzhua took it and saw a flattering smile on his face. I heard that you have made great contributions this time, and are you really awarding 2 medals? Wang Wenzhua could feel the envious eyes from all around. He was a little excited and a little upset. He drank a drink and smiled, oh, it's just a fluke. Sanlang, don't be too modest. Luan interjected, among all the people present at the time, only you saw the key. How could this be a stroke of luck? At this point, he recounted the clues that Wang Wenzhua had discovered from the wooden staff he carried with him, and everyone at the long table couldn't help but admire Wang Wenzhua. You don't know yet. Luan laughed and said, Sanlang comes from the Langyawang family and is a close friend of Lu Duhu. Just now, Lu Duhu even gave him a seat and had a great conversation. Upon hearing this, everyone's gaze turned from envy to awe towards Wang Wenzhua. Originally, it was only a few decades away from the northern and southern dynasties, and the court often selected scholars based on their social status. High-ranking clans were able to hold the rank of commoners, while humble clans were not as successful as prefectures and counties. As for the petty people, they were even more unbearable. There are many sources of top-quality clans. There were overseas Chinese surnames in the southern migration, with Wang, Xie, Yuan, and Shao being the most prominent. In the southeast, it is the Wu surname, with Zhu, Zhang, Gu, and Lu being the major ones. Shandong is known as the county surname, with Wang, Chui, Lu, Li, and Zheng being the major. Guanzhong is also known as the county surname, headed by Wei, Pei, Lu, Shui, Yang, and Du. Dai Bei is known as the Lu surname, which includes Yuan, Changsun, Yuan, Yu, Lu, Yuan, and Do. Shou. The above surnames, Qiao, Wu, Jun, and Lu, are collectively referred to as the four surnames. Empresses and scholars, state officials, and county officials are not selected unless they are the four surnames, and the Wang in Langya is one of the Wang surnames among the Qiao surnames. Although after the unification of the Sui and Tang dynasties, these aristocratic families no longer had the same level of prestige as before, the hundred-legged insect died without stiffening, and in the eyes of the public, it still existed high and mighty. Originally, Sanlang came from the Langyawang family, no wonder. As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a sound coming from the door and then heard the boss's angry scolding. Wang Wenzhua turned around and saw that Sangqiu was tightly holding onto a wine barrel, thrusting his head into it and drinking wildly, completely ignoring the boss's punches and kicks. He quickly got up and walked to the door, blocking the boss's fist and feet with one hand, and pulling Xianqiu's head out of the barrel with the other. He smiled and said, "Don't hit him. He's my person, I'll compensate you as much as it costs." "Your person?" The landlady looked up and down at Wang Wenzhua. The man in front of her was tall, with towering cheekbones and a thick beard connected to his temples. A pair of black and bright eyes were bright and lively. When the insults reached her mouth, she swallowed them again and glanced at her mouth, saying, "A shepherd's slave, you deserve to touch my good wine. Well, just take 10 5-baht coins." Wang Wenzhua counted the money and placed it in front of the landlady, pointing to Xianqiu lying on the ground. "Bring him some cold water, let him wake up. I drank too much Xianqiu wine just now, and it has been disposed of." Wang Wenzhua returned to the table and said, "Let everyone laugh." "San Lang, you really don't seem like a member of the noble family," sighed a person next to him. "It's so good to be a Sanhan Mu Nu. If it were me, I would have whipped him dozens of times earlier to make him sober up. Because I am not originally a member of the Langyawang family." Wang Wenzhua muttered inwardly, but smiled as he said, "We are in a foreign country with enemies everywhere. It's better to be lenient with those below us. Maybe we will need them someday." What San Lang said is true. Luan nodded and said, "Judging from the secret letter carried by that meticulous person yesterday, I'm afraid there won't be many days left for this peaceful life." Silence fell beside the long table, and people stared at the remaining wine in the cup before them, speechless. Baekje is a mountainous country, filled with mountains, valleys, swamps, and vast forests. Villages and towns are scattered between them. Unlike the Tang Dynasty, these forests are dense until noon sunlight cannot penetrate, as if they have never been disturbed since ancient times. The gloomy north wind blows through the pupils of the tree shadow, like a ferocious creature. Outsiders can feel like they are being stared at by a cold and malicious inexplicable object, making you only want to turn around and leave quickly, but this is an idea that cannot be said in front of the Shangguan. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Expedition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Expedition. Bang, bang, bang. The dull drumbeat seemed to hit everyone's heart, and everyone at the long table quickly stood up with serious eyes. "Hurry up to the schoolyard." Luan took out a handful of meat and threw it to the landlady, who ran over. "This is our drink money." According to the military law of the Tang Dynasty, if the completion of the 3 connections drum cannot be achieved, military law must be followed. Wang Wenzhua walked up to Xianqiu, who was still a bit confused, and lightly kicked him, saying, "Go back and tidy up, we're going to war." Then he quickly ran towards the school field. The military camp was resounding and chaotic. The servants carried bundles of feather arrows, sandbags, and spears onto the city walls. Craftsmen were busy repairing armor, crossbows, and putting horseshoes on warhorses and mules. Iron leaf armor was placed in a wooden bucket filled with sand and rolled along the ground to remove the rust on it. The women in the army were busy sewing their coats and cloaks. All buildings near the city walls have been demolished to prevent them from becoming objects of arson. The soldiers carefully polished their weapons, while the archers waxed their bowstrings. The horses hissed and panted, the officers gave orders, the soldiers cursed at each other, and the entire Sibi city was like a huge honeycomb, noisy to the extreme. Luan was the first one to leave the city. He rode a red horse, with a bronze mane and his cloak of the same color, like a burning flame. The women accompanying him watched him leave, some women sobbing softly, while more people silently watched the soldiers, silent. If it were me, I wouldn't dress so prominently. There are plenty of good archers among the people of Baekje. Wang Wenzhua looked at Luan's back and thought to himself. The soldiers lined up in 2 rows, with cavalry at the front and infantry and archers at the back. The target this time is the Baekje rebels in the area of Xinxian City, but the news is very chaotic. According to the intelligence transmitted, there are many counties in Baekje that have rebelled. Obviously, the seeds of the rebellion have already been sown, and there are even rumors that Goguryeo in the north has sent a large army to contain the Silla people, which is not a good omen. Sanlang, Sanlang. Wang Wenzhua raised his head and realized that Luan was calling him. He quickly kicked the horse's belly and urged it to come to Luan's side, saying, "What's up? Colonel. Sanlang, take a look." Luan restrained his mount and pointed his whip at the distant mountains. The scent of people and horses intertwined into a steaming white mist in the morning air. The cold wind brushed over their heads, and the general's flag blew with a hunting sound. The distant mountains presented a gloomy blue-black color, and no one knew what was hidden there, no one knew. "Do you think it's very dangerous for us to go directly to Xiongjin City like this? Dongyi are all locals, familiar with everything here, but we know very little. It's like. At this point, Luan stopped and began to think about how to express it more appropriately. The blind man rides a blind horse, facing the deep pool in the middle of the night. Yes, this analogy is great. Luan looked at Wang Wenzhua in surprise and said, "That's right. We're just like blind people now, and we don't know when we'll fall into the ambush of Dongyi, the derogatory term for Baekje by the Tang people at that time. That's terrible. Do you have any way to do it?" "I have a solution." Wang Wenzhua pondered for a moment. "How about this? Aren't there many soldiers of the three Koreas in our army this time? We can gather them together, distribute weapons, and let them be the vanguard. They are very familiar with the local situation. Is this okay?" Luan hesitated. "Will they work hard? Will they scatter and even collude with the Baekje people?" Wang Wenzhua smiled and said, "Although blind people can't see anything, it's even better to listen to the tunnels while guarding the city than to have sound eyes. It depends on how we use it. It seems you already have a plan in mind." Luan twisted his short beard on his chin and smiled, "Since that's the case, then everything is up to you." "Yes, Colonel." Wang Wenzhua did not refuse, and the army could not tolerate so much courtesy. He turned around and rode his horse towards the rear. In the early Tang Dynasty, the military system was still based on the prefectural system. The empire set up a total of 634 Zhichong prefectures in key areas of various provinces, counties, and cities throughout the country. Each prefecture had a total of 1,200 to 800 soldiers, with one Zhichong captain, one left and one right Gui captain, and one general, one changsha, and one military officer. Below the prefecture level, there are 300 people in the regiment, consisting of colonels and brigade commanders. 50 people form a team, with a team leader and deputy. 10 people make a fire, and there is a fire that lasts. If there is nothing to cultivate, then send troops. Among these more than 600 conflicting prefectures, 285 are located on Guanyi Road, i.e. Guangzhong area, to ensure Guangzhong's absolute military advantage over the four directions. Next is Hedong Road. Luan was originally a collateral branch of the Lu family in Hedong. After the northern Zhou dynasty conquered northern Qi, their ancestors migrated with the army to live in Shandong and served in the military mansion for generations. This time, Su Dingfang crossed the sea to embark on an expedition to Baekje, and almost all the athletes from Zhichong Prefecture in Shandong were conscripted. This time, Luan led 2 regiments of soldiers to rush to Xiongjin City, and more than 300 soldiers of the 3 Han army were distributed to each battalion. The road is long and endless. As the distance between the people and horses from Sibi City grew farther and farther, the wind grew stronger and the surroundings became quieter. On the southwest side of the road is a raised hill, and at the top of the hill, there are observation towers that serve as fortifications for the Baekje people to guard against attacks from the Silla people in the northeast direction. On the west side, there is a gentle wilderness, and until the end of sight, one can occasionally see smoke rising from the kitchen. It is a village of Baekje people, but as time goes by, farmland becomes less and less, and pedestrians cannot be seen on the roads. Wang Wenzhua jumped off his horse and felt stabbing pain on the inside of his legs. It seemed that the short period of peaceful life in Sibi City had made him weak. He looked around and saw the soldiers busy setting up deer antlers, lighting fires, feeding livestock, and setting up tents around the camp. He pushed aside Shangqiu's hand, who was about to take over the reins of the horse, and whispered, "Bring my crossbow, call 2 people, and lead the mule to walk around the forest with me, see if we can get some fresh meat." Shangqiu's mouth widened with excitement, preferring hunting over chopping firewood and feeding livestock. Quickly, he disappeared behind the tent. A few minutes later, when he reappeared, he had a broken crossbow in his hand, a bag of crossbow arrows, a short bow on his back, and 2 military slaves wrapped in black cloth, each holding a short spear and an iron fork. Wang Wenzhua looked and felt that both of them were still energetic, so he nodded. He moved his crossbow knife to the back to avoid accidentally catching the crossbow, and then the group walked down the road, flowing against the stream towards the depths of the forest. Shangqiu had a very good eye for picking people, and Wang Wenzhua was satisfied to find that the 2 soldiers who came with him were walking briskly on the land covered in fallen leaves, without making any sound. Not far away, there was a sound of a stream. Suddenly, Wang Wenzhua made a soft noise under his feet, stopped his steps, squatted down, and when he stood up again, he had a cracked dried walnut in his hand. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Wild Boar. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Wild Boar, It's Walnuts. Shangqiu leaned over and whispered, "This forest is full of walnut trees, all the way to the other end of the mountain. The wild boars here eat walnuts and grow the fattest. Every autumn, the people of Baekje hunt wild boars here and smoke their meat with walnut wood. Wild boar, that's not easy to deal with." Wang Wenzhua stopped and looked around. Not far away, there was a mountain depression where the stream merged into a small pool, and the edge of the pool was covered with thick walnut trees. The dense tree canopy formed a patch, covering most of the water surface. Shangqiu and I climbed up to the tree by the pond. The wild boar had good hearing and smell, but it was a half-blind person. "You 2 lead the mule away in ambush in the downwind, waiting for the signal," Wang Wenzhua whispered, while Shangqiu was translating beside him. The other 2 military slaves nodded and quickly hid. Wang Wenzhua and Shangqiu walked to the edge of the pool and chose a sturdy tree to climb up. Wang Wenzhua broke several branches and built a simple platform between the branches. Then, he filled the crossbow, installed the arrows, and patiently waited. Apart from the sound of flowing water, there is only occasional birds singing from a distance by the edge of the pond, which is quiet and a bit seeping. Wang Wenzhua wrapped his clothes tightly to resist the bone-chilling cold in the forest. He couldn't help but regret why he didn't put on his leather jacket when he came out. He was hesitating whether to let some military slave go back to get his coat, but he heard the sound of stepping on a broken branch not far away. His spirits suddenly lifted and he lightly patted Shangqiu beside him, saying, "Listen, here you are." Moonlight penetrated through the gaps in the leaves and reached the open space by the water pool. Wang Wenzhua could see a dark object emerge from the bushes. After taking a few breaths, he finally realized it was a huge wild boar. The moonlight shone on his huge protruding fangs, presenting a lifeless and dismal white color. The huge beast looked around cautiously, as if searching for potential enemies. In the end, it snorted a few times, and the bushes behind it began to shake violently, revealing several dark shadows. There are a total of 8, 2 big and 6 small. Shangqiu's breath made Wang Wenzhua's ears itch a bit. He clenched his right fist, pointed to the largest boar with his thumb, and then rotated his fist with his thumb facing down. Shangqiu nodded knowingly, picked up the short bow, strung the arrow, and then turned to look at his master. Wang Wenzhua picked up the crossbow, held his breath, and aimed slightly below the shoulder of the boar, where the heart was located. Then he pulled the trigger and felt a slight vibration from the crossbow. Just as Wang Wenzhua thought he had missed the shot, a piercing howl pierced through the night sky. The wild boar jumped up half a person high and then fell to the ground, spinning wildly as if searching for the attacker. Wang Wenzhua quickly kicked the iron ring under the crossbow machine with both feet, re-strung it, and then inserted the second square-headed arrow into the slot, aiming and pulling the trigger. This time, Wang Wenzhua missed the shot, and the arrow brushed against the shoulder of the wild boar, deeply sinking into the soil. This huge beast finally discovered where the enemy was hiding. It turned its head fiercely and collided with the trunk of the tree where Wang Wenzhua was located. The violent vibration almost caused Wang Wenzhua, who was winding the crossbow, to fall from the tree. Fortunately, Xianqiu next to him grabbed it. Wang Wenzhua, who was still in shock, tightly hugged the trunk of the tree, but soon he realized that the state of the wild boar was a bit wrong. Its impact on the tree was rapidly decreasing, and its howling seemed to have a sense of despair. Wang Wenzhua carefully changed the branch of a tree, filled his crossbow with strings, and shot another arrow. This time, Wang Wenzhua could clearly see the crossbow arrows piercing through the base of the wild boar's hind legs, and the huge beast finally fell down. Two other soldiers surrounded, and the wild boar struggled to get up, but the fourth crossbow shot from the tree completely shattered its efforts. Wang Wenzhua jumped down from the tree, and under the moonlight, the light-colored belly of the wild boar fluctuated violently. The airflow sprayed out from its nostrils, emitting intermittent moans. Even if the giant beast lay on the ground, it was as tall as its waist. Wang Wenzhua looked at the huge creature in front of him with awe. "This is really a big guy." Xianqiu whispered, "We can't get these people back." "Well, yes." Wang Wenzhua nodded and said, "Then let's first get the two front legs back, and then call a few people to move the remaining ones after we go back." Military camps. The bonfire was burning with a crackling sound, and half a fan of wild boar rib meat was spinning on the grill on the fire, with oil dripping down and a fragrant aroma overflowing. Wang Wenzhua sat by the fire, with short knives and plates on the nearby table, and the soldiers around him were drooling. "Xianqiu, this is yours." The steel knife cut open the ribs of the pig, and the crispy skin crackled under the blade. Hot oil flowed down, and Wang Wenzhua sprinkled salt and pushed the wooden plate to his servant. Xianqiu excitedly took the plate and sat cross-legged, swallowing it in large gulps, causing a commotion among the army slaves around him. There you. Wang Wenzhua cut two more pieces and handed them to the other two military slaves who had just gone with him on a plate. Those two didn't dare to be as big as Xianqiu, so they quickly knelt down and kowtowed before taking the plate and walking to the side to eat. Soon, Xianqiu finished the meat on the plate. He licked the grease on his fingers and looked at the pork on the grill with eager eyes. Wang Wenzhua smiled and handed Xianqiu the short knife in his hand, making a gesture of convenience. Xianqiu let out a cheer and ran to the grill to start cutting the meat. Wang Wenzhua patiently waited for Xianqiu to stop eating, then signaled to him and began speaking slowly to the soldiers around him. He spoke slowly and Xianqiu translated, "Xianqiu is my servant, I am his master, he serves me, and I provide him with food, clothing, shelter, and protection to ensure that he is not oppressed by outsiders. Today, while hunting wild boars, he made contributions, which is what he deserves. Besides, I also promise here that after this battle, I will give him freedom. At that time, he can go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants. If he is willing to continue serving me, he can receive corresponding rewards in addition to food, clothing, and shelter." End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Scouts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Scouts. Wang Wenzhua's words caused a great uproar among the military slaves. The slaves whispered and whispered, and Wang Wenzhua patiently waited until everything calmed down again before continuing. "I know you may not believe what I said earlier, but it's still a long time. You can use your own eyes to see, ears to listen, and see if what I said is true or false. Now I need 20 clever young men who need to walk in front of and on both wings of the army. When they discover the ambush of the beach people, they should send a signal first to prevent us from falling into a trap. Those who are willing can step forward. The military slaves remained silent. Just as Wang Wenzhua was about to say it again, he saw someone raise their arm and say two words. Do we also have compensation? Of course. Wang Wenzhua took out a book and said, do you see this? This is the roster of my Tang army, and anyone who wants to be named will be listed on it. From then on, you are no longer military slaves, but Tang's domain soldiers. Your wife and children are no longer slaves. People exchanged their eyes, but no one spoke. Just as Wang Wenzhua was considering whether to add more chips, someone finally walked out. It was the man who had just raised his arm to ask the question. He nodded at Sangqiu and uttered a syllable. He said he doesn't have a name, but because his arms are long, his companions call him an ape. Sangqiu whispered. Monkey. Wang Wenzhua raised his head and looked up and down at the person. He had a slender figure, slender arms, protruding cheekbones, sunken cheeks, and a pair of melancholic eyes beneath his thick black eyebrows. He nodded and said, this name is a bit indecent. Why don't you change it to Yuan Fei? It's as agile as a monkey. How about you ask him? Upon hearing Sangqiu's translation, the man excitedly knelt down and counted out a few heads, leaving Wang Wenzhua stunned. Master, he is thanking you for giving him such a good name. Well, let him go eat meat. Next, does anyone else need to sign up? After half a cup of tea, Wang Wenzhua put away his books. Behind him were 20 newly recruited domain soldiers who were gathered by the fire to eat meat, while Sangqiu loudly scolded the army slaves who were still trying to sign up, pushing Wang Wenzhua's way. When dawn fell, the soldiers poured water on the campfire, packed their bags, and began to move forward. The creek beside the road surges with a torrential flow, cold as ice. The large areas of walnuts and cedars on the hillside seem like silent sentries, silently gazing at these unfamiliar visitors. Unlike yesterday, I already have my own eyes on the slopes on both sides and in front. I hope yesterday's wild boar meat meal will take effect. Wang Wenzhua thought to himself. Yuan Fei walked in the forest, his footsteps light and agile, without any sound, just like his nickname. From a very young age, he discovered that he had this special ability and used throwing stones and some clever traps to catch some small prey. His father died early, and without his mother's power alone, he would not be able to support him and his two sisters. He really likes the name Wang Wenzhua gave him. For ancient people, names, especially the words written on paper, had a special mysterious power. The vast majority of the 3 Han army slaves like Yuan Fei had no proper names from birth to death. As soon as Yuan Fei thought that the 2 Chinese characters written by the unfamiliar Tang military officer on paper were exclusive to him, he felt an inexplicable excitement. Pop it. Yuan Fei almost instinctively hid in the shadow of an old maple tree, which was a necessary skill for a poacher. After a moment, he carefully poked his head out, listened attentively, and observed carefully. The forest gave him the answer. The rustling of leaves, the pulsating of a cold stream, and the cry of a snow owl from afar. The target appeared silently, and Yuan Fei's corner of his eye caught sight of a strand of white passing through the forest. He turned his head and tracked the strand of white, but could not see anything. The branches trembled slightly in the wind, and he reached out his wooden fingers to scratch each other. Perhaps he was mistaken, perhaps it was just a bird, or a reflection on the snow, or perhaps an illusion caused by moonlight. What exactly did he see? A few minutes later, a shadow suddenly emerged from the darkness of the forest, standing just over 10 meters away from Yuan Fei, overlooking the road below the mountain. He is tall and dressed in a gray-black fur robe, with a round black hat on his head. Only a white patch is visible at the chest, which should be the collar of his coat. He is holding a corner bow in his hand, and a horizontal knife and arrow pouch are hanging from his waist. Yuan Fei held his breath and trembled as he leaned against the tree trunk. His cheeks pressed against the bark, and the sticky and sweet sap flowed onto his face. After a moment, he heard a few footsteps again. How far is the Tang army from here? Report delivery rate, there is still about half a day's journey. As the conversation outside grew faster and faster, Yuan Fei gradually couldn't understand what was being said. However, the only thing he could do was hold his breath and stick tightly to the trunk of the tree to avoid being noticed by others. After a long time, he finally mustered the courage to poke his head out and was already empty. San Lang, do you think this guy is telling the truth? Luan glanced at Yuan Fei kneeling on the ground. This guy was thin and haggard, dressed in rags, emitting a foul odor all over his body, with a frightened expression. He didn't really look like a qualified detective. I think there's a high possibility. Wang Wenzhua replied calmly, what benefits does it bring us to panic? It makes us more cautious. Isn't this counterproductive? That's right. Luan nodded. And I have another reason. According to his statement, the enemy mentioned the rate in their conversation. If he didn't hear it wrong, the situation on the side of Jinxian City would be very bad. The muscles on Lu En's cheeks immediately tightened. De Du was a high-ranking official in Baekje, second only to Dezhua, roughly equivalent to the Tang Dynasty's governor of Dazhou and the general manager of the route. Those who could hold this position were none other than the high-ranking chieftains of Baekje and highly respected individuals. If there were leaders of this level among the rebels besieging Jinxian City, their scale and combat effectiveness would not be beyond the capabilities of a few hundred reinforcements in their own area. But if we hesitate, it is the sin of missing the deadline and we will undoubtedly die. In my opinion, it can be like this. Wang Wenzhua said, first send out a cavalry team to step on the white front. If there is any change, hold up fireworks as a sign, and the infantry will retreat to yesterday's campsite. There are already made trenches and fences, and they are close to the water source. The terrain is good, and they can be defended with strong crossbows. Even if they are surrounded by 10 times the enemy, they are not afraid. Well, that's it. The muscles on Lu En's cheeks suddenly relaxed. What Wang Wenzhua said about stepping on the white was the meaning of investigation during the Tang and Song dynasties. Stepping means inspecting, investigating, and searching by is a thin borrowed character, which means grass and trees are overgrown and cannot go deep. When these two characters are combined, they mean to explore potential enemy ambush areas. Missing the deadline would certainly violate military law, but if there are changes along the way and encountering strong enemies, it is another matter. I just realized today that I didn't see the signed text message. No wonder someone told me that they can't give me a reward for monthly tickets. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Rebels. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Rebels. De Du, the scouts of the Tang Dynasty have arrived. I think they may have already discovered our arrangement. Black-toothed Changji stood up, dressed in a white robe, one head taller than the tallest person in the room, but his movements were extremely agile, like a fierce tiger walking through the mountains and forests. His thick beard was connected to his temples, covering the lower half of his face, and his pupils were black and bright like agate. But if you look closely, it is not difficult to find that he is very young, at most only 30. He walked up to a large oak tree and looked down the valley road. He saw dozens of cavalry advancing along the road below. These enemies were walking slowly, stopping at every dangerous terrain and looking around. Obviously, the ambush hidden on the hillside not far ahead could not hide from these careful scouts. Give it to me. Black-toothed Changji extended his right hand, and the servant beside him quickly sent his bow and arrow, which was similar in size to his Buddha, and the arrow was as thick as a short spear. Black-toothed Chang drew an arrow and drew a full bow. With a slight aim, he released the bowstring. With a light sound, he saw one of the riders at the foot of the mountain dismount, and the others quickly lifted the body onto the horse, turned around, and rode away. Send orders and pursue, these scouts won't be too far away from the infantry. Are you saying that this arrow was shot from 100 steps away? Luan looked at the corpse on the ground and asked in an incredulous tone. Yes, Colonel. The respondent's face was as pale as the dead on the ground. What I mean is at least 100 steps away, but in reality, it could be even further. In the pale morning light, the deceased looked as if he was sleeping. He looked only average, but death smoothed the distinction between beauty and ugliness. A cloak covered the wound. Wang Wenzhua lifted the cloak, reached out his finger to explore the depth of the wound, and picked up the arrow next to him, which seemed like a short spear. He gestured and couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Waving his hand to let his subordinates take a break, Luan returned to the body with a bitter smile on his face. Maybe there's still time to escape now. It's already too late. Wang Wenzhua shook his head and said, the bandits are the main army, and I am the guest army. If we retreat, they will definitely know that some closer mountain path can take our lead. Instead of being at a loss in advance or retreat, it's better to fight here. Winning the battle will bring good luck to everything, but losing the battle will only lead to accepting our fate. Okay, but food. Don't worry about this. The soldiers have 3 days' worth of food on their bodies, and there are 10 days' worth of food in the army. Killing the accompanying livestock can provide us with at least half a month's worth of food. When the bandits suddenly erupt, there won't be so much food for a while. That's right. Luan nodded. People have long legs, but food doesn't have long legs. The rebels are developing so fast, and the only way to obtain food is to plunder and move around, instead of besieging themselves for more than 10 days. After thinking for a moment, he asked, what do you think should be done? Firstly, kill all the livestock except for the warhorses to ensure that the soldiers have enough to eat. Secondly, cut down more wood to reinforce the fence, the only thing left is to pray to the gods and Buddhas. You're right. Lu En's voice became low. San Lang, the gods and Buddha will bless us, won't they? Wang Wenzhua picked up the arrow and forcefully broke it, saying, gods and Buddhas only bless those who help themselves. Outside, there was a hustle and bustle of cars and horses, creating a chaotic scene. People shouted loudly, busy deepening trenches, reinforcing fences, and fine snow falling in the air. Wang Wenzhua extended his right hand, and the snowflakes fell in his palm, melting instantly. He exhaled a long breath and walked towards his tent. Sangqiu. Take my waist token and go to the place where the cows are slaughtered. If you want all the tendons, then say it's me who's useful. Wang Wenzhua took off his waist token and handed it to Sangqiu, who was closely following him. Yes, sir. Sangqiu responded and was about to turn around to leave, but was stopped by Wang Wenzhua. Is there anything else? Your hair. Wang Wenzhua walked up to Sangqiu and said, are all the hair of the 3 Koreans this long? Yeah, what's wrong? Sangqiu asked inexplicably, if it weren't for accidents, all the men in Mahan would never shave their heads for a lifetime. Great, go tell those military slaves that anyone willing to shave their heads tonight can have meat to eat. Is that the only thing? Xia Xiangru reached out his finger and fiddled with the wooden plate, which contained nothing but black boiled beans. Black Tooth nodded and picked up a spoon. Upon learning that Duke Fuxin had returned to His Highness Feng from the Japanese Empire, the heroes of all 4 sides rose up in response to the rebellion against the Tang and Silla bandits. However, there was not enough food left. If it weren't for the capture of Jinshin City, there wouldn't have been any black beans to eat. Shatsa's face turned ugly as he scooped a spoonful of beans into his mouth, chewed them a few times, and swallowed them with difficulty, as if taking medicine. It turned out that he and Haichi Changji were noble chieftains of Baekje, and he himself was one of the 8 noble surnames in Baekje, ranking above Haichi Changji in terms of official positions and social status. The Fuxin Duke among the 2 people is Guisher Fuxin. Guisher Fuxin was originally a collateral branch of the Baekje royal family, and in terms of seniority, he was still the cousin of King Yici, with an official position of Zwoping, roughly equivalent to the Minister of War. In 660 AD, Su Dingfang led a large army to cross the sea and annihilate Baekje. Shortly after, he led his troops back to his home country and relocated more than 12,000 people under King Yici of Baekje back to the Tang Dynasty. In this critical situation, Goguryeo Fushin organized the remaining forces of Baekje to resist while sending envoys to Japan to request assistance and welcoming Prince Fuyufengzhang, who was held hostage in Japan, back to his home country to ascend the throne. The Japanese sent people back to Fuyufengzhang and gifted a large amount of supplies, declaring that they would launch a patriotic army to assist. The aristocratic heroes in the old territory of Baekje rose up in response, and for a while, the old territory of Baekje was engulfed in war, with states and counties changing their banners. Shatsa Xiangru took a few bites and couldn't bear it anymore. He pushed the plate aside and whispered, "Changji, do you think the Japanese people's actions this time have ulterior motives? That's natural. Although it's like losing one's lips and teeth, there's no effort in vain." Black-toothed Changji ate it very well, as if it weren't boiled beans on a plate, but rather everyday delicacies. However, our country has a close relationship with the Japanese, and even if it ends up in the hands of the Japanese, it's better than being cheaper than the Silla and Tang people. Shatsa nodded as if, realizing that during the early Tang dynasty, the Korean peninsula was in the pre-Three Kingdoms period, namely Goguryeo, Silla, and Baekje. Among them, Goguryeo and Baekje were both countries established by the Fuyu people, an ethnic group in northeast China from Han to Tang, while the Silla people were local ethnic groups on the peninsula, which were established by the Three Koreans. Goguryeo is located in Liaodong and the northern part of the Korean peninsula, Baekje is in the southwestern part of the Korean peninsula, and Silla is in the southeastern part of the peninsula. End of this chapter.